The last session ended up being very much one step forward, two steps back. And what I was aiming to do in that session was to resolve all the bushing on the rods that I'd made. And the conclusion of that was to try and set the rods onto the engine and make sure everything was going fine. And of course it didn't. There was a quartering issue. Not to be overly surprised about when you work on these kind of projects. So instead of getting to a completion, there was a couple of steps back, which involved figuring out how to measure the angles, which has been a bit of a challenge. I ended up doing most of it at the club with the help of Dan Coop, who's our latest movie star, having featured in a recent episode of Repair Shop. But he's a very competent engineer and very helpful. So what we did was we set up the trailing axle, or both axles actually, the leading axle first in the lathe to try and measure the angles, which we thought we'd done fairly conclusively. And we did the same with back one, and there was a significant discrepancy, which is why we had a problem. So what we did was, what Dan did, is he took a bloody blowtorch to the engine and we heated up the wheel, and just because beginning to suspect there's quite a lot of Loctite in this project, in this engine, we heated up the wheel and it came off. So it was Loctited on. Unfortunate process of heating the wheel damaged the paintwork, which I thought wasn't a big problem until I tried to get rid of the paintwork. The stuff that hadn't been heated came off relatively easily in straightforward paint stripper. The bit that had been heated, however, had managed to make itself into some kind of stove enameled plastic coating on the wheel, which would not come off with any amount of chemical action. So I've spent a considerable amount of time with Dremels, wire brushes and other various things to stick on the end to get the wheel back into a state of nudity. So that was done, and I then proceeded to set the thing up again, and still things were binding. So the first thing to check was to make sure my rods are right and the centers are the same distance apart, which they are. And the second question on the rods is the crank pins on the driving axle, because we know there's a problem there. They're not long enough. They don't meet the dimensions either on the drawings or to match the drawings that we've subsequently done. So the next exercise was to remove the crank pins. Here they are. And I just took a guess that these might also be Loctited in. And sure enough, this time protecting the wheel paint with a bit of iron brew can. I heated these up with a blowtorch and they came out. This one came out very easily. This one fought, so it's got a bit mashed. Doesn't matter because these aren't much use anymore anyway, because they're just not the right size. So the next challenge is going to make two sets of crank pins. And the other thing we can do, these ones have got round ends where the valve gear meets up. That's not correct for the engine or for most Walschaerts engines, where those are made to square so that you get accurate and consistent timing for the valve gear. So that is going to happen on the new crank pins. So let's get started. It's mostly lathe work, so let's see how we go. So what I've done is I've made a stack of slip gauges from this box here underneath the crank bearing here. The idea is to make that rigid. Now what we can do is, using these contraptions which I made yesterday. Okay, so that is indicating an angle. So we're getting different results to what we found last night, because what we found was 117. Okay, being profoundly distrustful of my metrology, what I've done here is to use this to find the angle. So that finds the angle like that. And it's all a little little bit approximate. So using chronometer, zero it on the table, stick it on that. That gives me a different reading. 1.45. I then put things together and still seem to have a problem with the quartering. So what I've done is I've checked the rods, the drillings on the rods are actually parallel. I've used the drills and squares to check that, and that seems to be okay. The next thing that need to be dealt with was crank pins. So the crank pins I have just taken out of the wheel, the front wheel set. The drawings that we created for the conrods for these result in a wider arrangement here than fitted the crank pins on the drawings. So what we need to do is to make crank pins to suit these, and that will give us the opportunity to change the end to a square as it should be. What we're going to do is we're going to basically take it down to working diameter, then we'll do the wheel recess part of the pin first. So what we're going to do is we're going to make that bit of the pin first to slightly larger diameter than this, because what I want to do is press fit these rather than Loctite them in. And then we'll cut this off, or bring that to 7/16 and cut it off long, and then we'll put the whole thing in the mill in a collet block so that we can actually cut the 4 squares on the end here to pick up the valve gear. First thing is, let's line ourselves up with the first cuts and see where we go. So I'm touching off here to get my X0. What I'm doing with that is I'm basically just winding this until I can just see a scrape mark on the metal. Great, so we need 17th thou off of that shoulder, so let's do that first, and then we'll start bringing the diameter. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll run the first bit of this in that way, and we'll take the last bit out that way. Okay, endeavour. That's going to come back in a minute, so let's just get rid of that. We have the right tool for this job. Good. I just get that same dimension. We should be golden. We can take it all the way to the shoulder there, because that's the major diameter we need for the other part as well. So let's just get on with it. So I start worrying about metrology, because according to the DRO, I've got 4 thou, nearly 5 thou to take off, and this says I've got off the radius, this is a 3 thou off the diameter. So if in doubt, get another guessing stick. So that's 445, 4375. So this one is telling me 5 thou has got to go, essentially. All right, let's trust the DRO. I believe that is now correct. So what we're going to do is just offer up the rods. So these have been actually reamed to this size exactly, but close to, because the old pins were not that size. Right, so that would need reaming out. That would need reaming out. Okay. So spot on before 375. Let's have a look at this again. So 445. So I have got another couple of thou to go. Now I think we'll try and take the 1 thou off with abrasive paper. Spot on. Spot on. A little bit more at this end to go. Good. Right, so what we need to do is to cut this to length. It's the usual trick here of using a blade to zero the cutting. Zero Y. So that's 0.75, and the square, so that should bring us down to about 60 RPM. Very slow. So let's just mark this. Okay, that's getting a bit not so good. Can I break that off? Yeah, break that off now. Okay, well, we're going to face that end anyway. It's most of a crank pin. Now, the next question is, do we have enough material exactly and just enough material to make the next one. Okay, what we need to do is just clean up that face and put a center in so that we can do the same again. That's not nice. It looks like that's a bit out of true, which would be a great shame because we've got that diameter spot on where we want it to be. Okay, that's plus or minus 1,000, as good as we're going to get. That's the chamfer on that end. Might need a bit tidying up, but it's mostly there. So let's get back to chunking the rest of this down to the right diameter. So let's see what happens. We'll try and sand this a bit. Cutty-offy time. Semi-finished crank pin. The next thing we need to do is to cut square on the end of these pins. I've set this up in the mill with a collet block, which will give us our registration for the 4/4 of this. So what I've decided to do is to take this down to the correct depth and slowly work our way in on the X. 11/16 cutter, which happened to be the best looking one I've got, and off we go. So what I've done is I've placed a clamp on the vise, so when I take the block out it goes back in exactly the same place, and hopefully when we cut back in we end up at exactly the same place again. So against the block, same again. Second face done. Idiot check. That was good. Spot on according to that. Right, let's take that tip off the end there. Okay, so what we need to do now is just swap over to the second pin, which is lurking here somewhere. So swap the second pin, and as they say in the shampoo adverts, rinse and repeat. Number one pin. Number two pin. Line ourselves up again, and this should just do the same thing all over again. We're going to use the collet chuck again. I'm looking to use abrasive methods rather than cutting to get this off. So we put this in the chuck, we've got the rods to hand, and we can check our fits. So two things to look at. One is the holes in the rods, and two is the diameter of that. So let's just tighten this up. And it's not running very straight in that chuck for some reason. However, that doesn't matter for what we're doing just now. I mean, when we made these pins, they were all done in one operation in the other chuck, so one hopes that the two diameters are actually concentric. Where we are with these is we have taken these out with a 7/16 reamer, so we've got a good running ream through for that. These are too tight a fit. Now the options we have are further reaming or reducing the diameter of the pin. I think let's just get out the micrometer. I'm not parallel. 4, 3, 8, 5, 4, 3, 9. So it's 1 thou, not parallel. So 7/16 is 4375. So we are over. So let's just try and take some material off this and see how we get on. Seven, 437.6. Okay, a little more off this end. Okay, I'm going to use something finer to polish it up a bit because this is a journal after all. What's this? 600. Oh, look at that. Pretty much perfect. Pretty much perfect. There's a slight side to side, which is what we want because the wheels are going to go up and down. But front to back, that feels really good. The next thing is to put the tail in the wheels. So we need to get these out, put them back in the other way around. Let's check where we are with the holes in the wheels. Okay, so at this point it's not a good fit. It feels just a little bit too tight. Also that chamfer is gone, so I'm going to remake the chamfer with a file. Okay. Quick polish with 600, then try it again. Okay, those are now both going in nicely. We're going to press the crank pins in. There's a couple of things we need to bear in mind. One of them is that that square has to be exactly in line with the centre of the axle. I've already used the wonderful Loctite 7061 cleaner on the pin and on the hole. Now we will use the 638 to hold this in place. There we go. So, get it rough position. Turn it so it's in the right. It's gripping already. pretty good. Not quite home. A little tappy tap tap should sort that out. Make sure that we're still, I think we are. No, we're not. Looks good. Right hand side done. Let's do the same on the left hand side. Okay, I just sanded it down a little bit and it feels like it's going to make a better fit in there. So the same thing with the centre drill. That's our target. Touch more. Spot on. Check that one again. Good. Right, those need to get set off, and once that is done we can try remounting them and try the rods again. So I got the crank pins done and fitted, put the rods back on, and I was still having binding. What I've done is I've actually spent a day in here without the cameras going, so that I didn't have the distraction of trying to do that, to try and figure out exactly what was going on. So I'll just tell you a story about what I did. I mean, looking at the problem, it appeared that the rods were actually, or the centers in the rods were actually too close together, because it was binding in two positions. So what I thought to do was to make some eccentric bushes, which I proceeded to do. Two different sizes. The first set, that didn't solve it. There's a second set with a bigger offset, 30 thou offset, and that didn't solve it either. Now, actually trying to figure out the metrology on something this long when I don't have anything that measures that length apart from a steel rule is a bit challenging. Yes, I've got the DROs, and I have used those to do measuring before now, and I didn't actually use it this time because the problem was clearly something different from what I was expecting. So once I put the eccentric bushes on, what I discovered is I had cleared one of the fouling points but not the other. So it's not the spacing on the rods that's incorrect. It is something further to do with the crank pins. Now, you need to have a certain degree of play anyway, because you've got suspension here, so things move up and down. So there needs to be a certain degree of play in here. Certainly when I made these pins to these bushes, they were very, very tight indeed. I mean, it was an ordinary sort of engineering bearing clearance. So once I'd figured out that this here was not the answer, what I started to do was to work on reaming the parallel bushes. So I put the bushes that were in this end back in because they were good, and I got the adjustable reamers out, and very slowly I started to ease the diameters of both the bushes, literally scraping a few times, putting it back on, scraping a few times and putting it back on, and eventually I got to a point where I was getting movement all the way around. So then I used that to set this wheel. This is the one that was off, and was definitely not at the correct quartering. So I used the rods, and I got rods on both sides, to actually set this quartering, glued everything up, and that's it. So I've now got wheels that go round, which is quite a bit of progress for the waste of very many hours, but not a lot of metal in this situation. So the next thing that I will move on to is, well, there's two things I'm going to get on with next, and that will not be in this video, it's definitely for next week. One is looking at crossheads, and these are the crosshead castings, and also looking at this, which is the internal rod, for which I need to make bushes both for this end and that end, and this one's a split bush, so that one is going to be more interesting to talk about when I get to it. So thanks for watching this video, and please do consider subscribing. I'm not at the magic 500 subscribers yet, but when I get there, then that is going to help a lot with the distribution of this video, and hopefully lots more people will get to see it, and that's a good thing, I hope. Well, thanks for watching anyway, and see you next time.